The polished metal floors of Orion's hub hummed softly beneath the weight of countless boots, hooves, and alien appendages. It was a place of commerce, culture, and ceaseless movement, a shining beacon of human and alien cooperation. And yet, amid the flashing holoads and lively merchant stalls, a single, unremarkable figure shuffled unnoticed through the crowds. Ben Carter. Janitor. Old. Slow. At least, that's what everyone thought. "Hey, old man, you missed a spot," a young worker sneered, kicking over a cup just as Ben finished sweeping the corridor. A few nearby dockhands chuckled, shaking their heads at the pitiful sight. Ben didn't respond. He just leaned on his broom, letting the insult pass like a breeze through a forgotten alleyway. He'd heard worse. It wasn't just humans who mocked him, aliens did too. A reptilian worker, scales shimmering under the station's artificial lights, hissed in amusement. Surprised the dust isn't sweeping him away instead. More laughter. Ben bent down slowly, almost painfully, and picked up the cup. His hands were rough, knuckles gnarled like old tree roots, but steady. He placed it in the waste chute and resumed his work. He had no need to defend himself. Not yet. The incident. Across the loading docks, the station's workforce moved with purpose, unloading cargo, securing shipments, handling disputes. It was a delicate dance of trade and tension. And then, a ripple in the flow. A disturbance. A sharp yelp. A young worker, barely past 20, was cornered by three towering figures in sleek, black-armored coats. Their leader, a hulking, red-skinned alien with eyes like polished obsidian, jabbed a clawed finger into the worker's chest. "This is Syndicate territory now," the alien growled, his voice deep and rumbling. "You work, you pay. Understand?" The worker stammered. I don't have anything." A swift backhand sent him sprawling onto the cold metal floor. The station's inhabitants turned away. No one intervened. The security forces stationed at Orion's hub were either bribed or too afraid to challenge the growing presence of the Syndicate. Ben watched. His expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. A memory. A shadow of a past long buried. He gripped his broom just a little tighter. A grave mistake. The thugs laughed, turning their attention elsewhere, searching for their next victim. One of them, a wiry, insectoid alien with serrated arms, sneered as he stepped toward Ben. "Out of the way, old man," he said, shoving Ben aside. It was supposed to be a harmless push. A casual dismissal of a weak, aging human. But the moment the alien's hand touched him, Ben's entire body stiffened. Something inside him snapped. His posture shifted, his footwork adjusting in a way so subtle it went unnoticed. 1,000 hours of muscle memory, buried under years of pretending, suddenly flared to life. For the first time in years, his body remembered. But he did nothing. Not yet. He let the shove carry him a step backward. Then he turned away, broom in hand, continuing his work as if nothing had happened. The Syndicate thugs laughed. The workers chuckled nervously. No one noticed the sharp glint in Ben's eyes. No one saw the storm that was about to come. The air in Orion's hub felt heavier that night. The station's artificial lights dimmed to their evening cycle, casting long shadows across the corridors. Most workers had retired to their quarters, but Ben Carter remained, broom in hand, moving through the empty halls. He wasn't cleaning. He was watching. Waiting. Echoes of the past. Long ago, he had been a different man. Not a janitor, not a frail old worker to be mocked, but a soldier. A warrior. They had called him the Ghost. During the Terran Draconis Wars, Ben had been a legend, a name whispered in fear among alien warlords. He had led impossible missions, slipping past enemy lines, taking down entire squads with precision. His body had been a weapon, his mind a battlefield. But that was a lifetime ago. He had left that world behind for a reason. Yet tonight, as he moved through Orion's hub, those instincts stirred again. The Syndicate tightens its grip. Over the past few weeks, the Syndicate's control of the station had grown bolder. Their demands increased, their threats carried more weight. Orion's hub, once a place of trade and neutrality, now felt like occupied territory. The workers remained silent. Even the security forces turned a blind eye. And then they went too far. Tuck, a small, four-armed alien janitor, was one of the few station workers who treated Ben with kindness. They often worked the same shifts, sharing quiet conversations about the station's maintenance. Tonight, Tuck had spoken out, told a group of thugs that the workers weren't their pawns. For that, he was beaten nearly unconscious in the supply dock. Ben found him there, slumped against the wall, his bright yellow uniform stained with blood. His forearms twitched weakly. They won't stop," Tuck whispered, his voice barely a rasp. No one fights back." Ben knelt beside him, the muscles in his jaw tightening. No one fought back. That was the problem. A silent intervention. That night, the Syndicate lost 3 men. No one saw what happened. No cameras recorded the attacks. All they knew was that 3 Syndicate enforcers had been found unconscious, bones shattered, weapons stripped from their bodies. The Syndicate was confused. Who would dare? A rival gang? A rogue security force? The workers whispered. Fear turned to something else, hope. Ben, as always, remained silent. He continued pushing his broom, sweeping away the dust. But deep in his mind, the old warrior had awakened. And this time, he wasn't going back to sleep. The tension in Orion's hub thickened like a storm cloud waiting to break. The Syndicate knew someone had attacked their enforcers, but they had no idea who. Their paranoia grew, leading to more violence. Workers whispered in hushed tones. Whoever had struck the first blow had given them something they hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Ben Carter, as always, moved through the station unnoticed. He was just the old janitor. Just the man they all laughed at. But that was changing. The Syndicate's escalation. The Syndicate believed they were dealing with a rival group. They sent out twice as many enforcers, shaking down workers and cracking down on anyone who looked suspicious. Then came the ambush. A young worker named Leo, one of the cocky ones who had mocked Ben before, was walking alone through the loading docks when he was grabbed. The thugs shoved him against a crate, their alien faces twisted in cruel amusement. "You think you can defy us?" one of them hissed. Leo stammered, shaking his head. He had done nothing, but it didn't matter. They needed to make an example. The first punch sent him sprawling. The second never landed. A blur of movement. A flash of motion too fast for an old man. One moment, the Syndicate enforcer had raised his fist. The next, he was on the ground, gasping for air, his own weapon twisted from his grasp. Another thug lunged, and within seconds, Ben had disarmed him, a single precise strike sending the alien into unconsciousness. Leo stared in shock. Ben Carter, the janitor, the old man everyone ignored, had just taken down 2 armed Syndicate enforcers in less than 10 seconds. Ben turned to him. "Go home, kid." Leo swallowed hard and nodded, scrambling away. For the first time, he didn't see an old man. He saw something else. Old instincts, new resolve. Ben knew the Syndicate wouldn't let this go. They would come harder, more brutal than before. So he prepared. His muscles were slower than they had been in his youth, but the discipline remained. The mind remembered what the body struggled to keep up with. He trained in the empty maintenance halls, his movements calculated and sharp. A warrior's instincts did not fade, they merely rested, waiting to be called upon. And now, he would need every skill he had left. The doubters start to notice. Leo told Mira, a skeptical but sharp-minded technician, what had happened. "No way," she said. "You're telling me the janitor took out 2 trained enforcers?" "I saw it with my own eyes," Leo insisted. Mira wasn't convinced, until she started watching Ben more closely. The way he moved, the way he reacted before things happened. The way he never seemed afraid. The workers had laughed at Ben for years. Now, for the first time, they were looking at him differently. And some of them were starting to believe. The past comes knocking. The syndicate wasn't done. Their leader, Rock-Thal, a towering reptilian alien, received word of the attacks. He ordered a brutal message be sent to the workers. And he wanted to see this troublemaker for himself. That night, syndicate forces swarmed the lower decks of Orion's hub. Ben watched from the shadows. It was time to stop hiding. Time to show them who he really was. And as he stepped forward, Leo and Mira, who had secretly followed him, stood frozen in shock. The old man wasn't afraid. He was ready. The lower decks of Orion's hub were eerily quiet. Syndicate thugs roamed the dimly lit corridors, their weapons drawn, searching for the phantom who had dared to strike against them. Leo and Mira crouched behind a stack of cargo crates, watching in disbelief as Ben Carter, old, frail Ben, walked straight into the open. "Is he insane?" Leo whispered. Mira didn't answer. She was too busy watching. Ben didn't look nervous. He didn't hesitate. He moved with purpose. And then, all at once, the fight began. The janitor who wasn't just a janitor. The first thug, a burly, four-armed brute, lunged at Ben with a shock baton. Ben sidestepped effortlessly, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He twisted the thug's wrist, yanked the baton free, and drove his elbow into the alien's throat. The thug collapsed, gasping. Another came at him from behind. Ben ducked, sweeping the alien's legs out from under him before delivering a swift, precise strike to the back of the head. A third thug raised a blaster. Too slow. Ben was already in motion, shoving a nearby crate into the alien's gut and closing the distance before the weapon could be fired. He grabbed the thug's arm, twisted it at an unnatural angle, and forced him to pull the trigger, into his own ally. In less than 20 seconds, 5 enforcers were down. Leo and Mira watched, mouths open in shock. This wasn't just skill. This was warrior's instinct. The workers start to believe. The fight didn't go unnoticed. Workers peered out from the shadows, seeing what no one had believed possible. The old janitor was taking on the syndicate, and winning. Ben didn't fight like a desperate man. He fought like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. And for the first time, the workers, who had spent years being afraid, felt something stir inside them. Hope. The syndicate's warning. Ben knew this was just the beginning. The syndicate wouldn't take this humiliation lightly. Rock-Thal, their leader, sent a final message across the station. A giant hologram flickered to life in the central marketplace, showing the alien's scarred, reptilian face. His voice was a low growl that sent shivers through the crowd. "This is your only warning," he said. "Obey, or face complete destruction." Fear returned to the workers. But this time, something was different. This time, they had seen one man stand against the syndicate. And suddenly, the idea of fighting back didn't seem so impossible anymore. Training for war. Ben didn't wait for the workers to come to him. He went to them. "If you want to be free," he said, "you have to fight for it." Some were hesitant. Others, like Leo and Mira, were ready. Ben began training them in secret, using abandoned sections of the station. He taught them not just how to fight, but how to survive. How to move. How to think. How to win. They weren't soldiers. Not yet. But under Ben's guidance, they were learning. And soon, the Syndicate would find out the hard way. Orion's hub was no longer theirs to control. The tension in Orion's hub was at its breaking point. The Syndicate thugs patrolled the station like wolves, watching for any sign of rebellion. But something had changed, there was a shift in the air. The workers, once cowed and afraid, now moved with purpose. They spoke in hushed whispers. They shared glances of understanding. They were preparing. And at the heart of it all stood Ben Carter. The old janitor was no longer invisible. He was their leader. The Syndicate's plan uncovered. Mira had been working tirelessly, using her technician access to tap into the station's encrypted communications. What she found sent a chill down her spine. Rock-Thal wasn't just here to control Orion's hub. He was going to destroy it. She rushed to find Ben, her breath ragged. "It's worse than we thought," she panted. "They've rigged the core. If they don't get full control of the station, they'll blow it." Leo, standing nearby, paled. "They'd kill everyone?" Ben's face darkened. He had fought enemies like Rock-Thal before. Some men craved power. Others craved chaos. But the worst kind? The ones who saw lives as bargaining chips. "Then we stop them," Ben said simply. Mira shook her head. "We don't have weapons, we don't have numbers, and we sure as hell don't have time." "We do have something," Ben interrupted. He looked around at the workers who had gathered in the shadows. "We have each other." The workers weren't soldiers. But they had knowledge, of the station's layout, of its hidden passageways, of its systems. They had been invisible for so long that the Syndicate had stopped seeing them as a threat. That was about to change. Preparing for the final stand. Ben divided the workers into teams. The saboteurs, led by Mira, tasked with disabling the detonators without setting them off. The disruptors, workers who would use the station's layout to set traps, block pathways, and cut off Syndicate reinforcements. The fighters, a small group trained by Ben, including Leo, who would engage directly if needed. It wasn't a perfect plan. It wasn't even a good plan. But it was their plan. And it was their best shot. The battle begins. The Syndicate moved through the station with confidence. They had numbers. They had weapons. They had no idea what was coming. Mira and her team struck first. Using access tunnels, they disabled power to key sections of the station, plunging parts of Orion's hub into darkness. The disruptors sprang into action next, sealing off escape routes, redirecting airlocks, sabotaging equipment. The Syndicate found themselves cut off, disoriented. And then, the fighters attacked. Ben led the charge, his movements precise, his strikes efficient. Leo followed close behind, no longer the cocky worker who had once laughed at the old janitor. Now, he fought with determination, mirroring Ben's training. The workers, once terrified, now fought like people with nothing left to lose. The Syndicate wasn't ready for them. The tide was turning. A fateful meeting. Ben pushed forward, taking down thug after thug. He moved with the efficiency of a man who had spent his life fighting. Then he saw him. Rock-Thal. The Syndicate leader stood in the control center, watching the battle unfold. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look surprised. He looked amused. Ben stepped forward, his muscles aching, his breath heavy. Rock-Thal tilted his head. And then, recognition flickered across his reptilian face. "The ghost," he whispered. Ben's heart pounded. Rock-Thal knew who he was. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was personal. The air inside Orion's hub was thick with tension. The station flickered between light and darkness as power failure spread. The workers fought with everything they had, holding the line against the syndicate's forces. But Ben Carter had only one target in mind. Rock Thal. The old warrior and the syndicate leader stood face to face in the control center, the chaos of the battle raging outside. Rock Thal grinned, his sharp teeth glinting under the emergency lights. They told me the ghost was dead. He took a step forward, his reptilian eyes narrowing. I should have known better. Ben's hands curled into fists. His body was old, worn, and aching from the last fight. But his mind? His instincts? They were sharper than ever. He wasn't just a janitor. He was a soldier. Clash of Titans. Rock Thal attacked first. He was fast, faster than a man his size had any right to be. A massive clawed hand slashed through the air, aiming for Ben's throat. Ben dodged just in time, rolling to the side. His bones protested, his muscles screamed, but he didn't stop. He pivoted and landed a precise strike to Rock Thal's ribs. The syndicate leader barely flinched. You're old, Carter, Rock Thal sneered. You don't belong on the battlefield anymore. Ben exhaled, shaking out his hands. Then what does it say about you, needing an army to fight an old man? Rock Thal roared in anger, charging again. This time, Ben didn't dodge. He met him head-on. The two clashed in a brutal hand-to-hand fight, skill versus brute force. Rock Thal's attacks were relentless, each strike meant to break bones. But Ben moved like a ghost, slipping past attacks, countering with ruthless efficiency. For every blow Rock Thal landed, Ben returned too. For every injury Ben sustained, he pressed forward. He could feel himself slowing. His body wouldn't last much longer. But he only needed one opening. The workers hold the line. Outside the control center, the battle raged. Leo and the others fought desperately, holding back the last of the syndicate's forces. Mira shouted over the chaos, the detonators are almost disabled. Hold them off a little longer. A brute of an alien swung at Leo, but he ducked just in time, countering with a strike of his own. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a warrior. But Ben had taught him well. The workers weren't just surviving anymore. They were winning. The final blow. Inside the control room, Rock Thal had been pinned. The syndicate leader's claws wrapped around his throat, squeezing. Ben's vision blurred. His limbs weakened. Rock Thal leaned in, whispering, "You're finished, old man." But Ben had been in worse situations before. And he wasn't finished yet. With the last of his strength, Ben reached into his belt, grabbed a small plasma tool, one he had stolen from the station's maintenance unit, and jammed it into Rock Thal's side. The tool ignited. Rock Thal howled in agony, his grip loosening. Ben used the opening. He twisted free, grabbed Rock Thal by the arm, and threw him to the ground. With one final, decisive move, Ben slammed his boot into Rock Thal's chest, pinning him down. The syndicate leader gasped for air, his strength fading. Ben leaned down, his voice calm. "This station isn't yours." Rock Thal's eyes flickered with fear. And then, a loud explosion rocked the station. For a moment, Ben thought the syndicate had set off the detonators. But then he heard Myra's voice over the station's intercom. "We did it. The detonators are disabled. We won." Ben exhaled, exhaustion crashing into him. It was over. A warrior's last stand. The remaining syndicate forces surrendered or fled. The workers, once powerless, stood victorious. Leo and Mira rushed into the control room, finding Ben standing over Rock Thal's unconscious body. Leo's eyes widened. You actually won." Ben smirked, wiping sweat from his brow. "You sound surprised." Mira chuckled, shaking her head. Remind me never to underestimate old men again. Ben let out a tired laugh. His body ached, every muscle screaming in pain. But as he looked around at the workers, his people, standing strong, he knew it had been worth it. The syndicate was gone. Orion's hub was free. But for Ben Carter, his fight was finally over. The battle was over, but Orion's hub was far from peaceful. The damage to the station was extensive, flickering lights, shattered panels, and debris scattered everywhere. Workers moved through the halls, helping the wounded and securing what was left of the syndicate's forces. Ben Carter stood in the heart of it all, feeling the weight of the fight settle into his old bones. His breath was still ragged, his hands still shaking from the adrenaline, but deep inside, something unfamiliar stirred. Relief. For the first time in years, he wasn't running. He was home. The aftermath. Mira and her team worked quickly to restore full control of the station's systems. The detonators had been disabled, the emergency lockdown lifted, and a distress beacon sent to the nearest Federation patrol. The syndicate's remaining enforcers had either surrendered or fled, their empire on Orion's hub crumbling before their eyes. As Leo helped the injured, he glanced over at Ben, watching the old man carefully. "You're really something else," Leo muttered, shaking his head. "I thought you were just some janitor who gave good advice." Ben chuckled, wincing slightly as he sat down. "I was just a janitor." Leo scoffed. "Nah. You were never just anything. A choice to make." Later, as the workers gathered in the mess hall, Mira approached Ben with a data pad in hand. "We've got full control of the station," she reported. "The Federation's on their way. Once they get here, they'll clean up whatever's left of the syndicate." Ben nodded. "Good." She hesitated before continuing. "They'll also be looking for someone to take charge here. Someone who can rebuild, keep the station running, make sure this doesn't happen again." Ben looked at her, knowing where this was going. "You're saying I should stay?" Mira smiled. "You kept us alive, Carter. You saved this station." She gestured to the workers around them. "These people trust you. We trust you." Ben exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. For years, he had been moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to get attached. But here, he had made a difference. He had a home. A leader rises. When the Federation finally arrived, they found Orion's hub standing strong. The workers met them at the docks, not as victims, but as survivors. And at the head of it all stood Ben Carter. Not a janitor. Not a ghost. But the new leader of Orion's hub. The old soldier had finally found his purpose again. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere.